Welcome back to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. I'm your host, Robert Scrobe. On today's show, we're featuring Jim Hobart. He is the Digital Executive and UX Strategist for Classic System Solutions. He's been doing that over 2 decades, and we've had a really interesting conversation about his background, some of the engagements he has, his approach on design sprints, his approach really on UX strategy and engagement. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as well.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for coming on to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's get a little bit into your background and what you do. I know that in previous conversations, we've kind of explored this a bit in terms of your extensive engagement and work in the consulting space, but why don't you give a rundown of your highlights of your career and kind of where you are today?
Sure. I actually got into UX, specifically consulting, a while ago, starting in actually about 1993. Back then, there were very few UX consulting firms. I think there was like HFI, UIE, which is Jared. And then I worked and was hired by a company called CCI out of Chicago. And that was maybe 2-3 years. I was pretty much the main consultant. I worked with a lady named Christine Comerford, and she did a lot of speaking, and then I also did a lot of public speaking. And then out of that, obviously, there was a lot of engagements. That company actually got sold to a company out of Houston. We had a product that we had developed, interestingly, to make requirements gathering faster and do rapid prototyping. So, and they bought the company and that product, and then I actually went out on my own. So started Classic Systems in '96 and have been doing UX and digital strategy consulting ever since.
So what's interesting about your background is that, I mean, you've pretty much covered it all. You've done complex enterprise user experience projects. You've gotten yourself involved with usability testing, design. You've got clients that range anywhere from Intel and Boeing all the way down to Lockheed and government agencies, Hershey, Tyco. Was it a matter of working for one big company, and then because you had that experience, it just kind of blossomed into other opportunities as they were made available to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that is somewhat the case. For instance, in the insurance space, we've been working with Progressive Insurance since 94, I think 93, 94. So everything through, doing training, probably over 1,000 people, UX, UI design, to, things like prototyping. And obviously a whole lot of companies worked on a lot of their major projects. And then, they were kind of like a tree. So in the insurance space, as an example, many of those executives would go on to other insurance companies, or other insurance companies would, just call us and say, hey, whatever you're doing at Progressive, we'd like to do that as well. So obviously it worked out pretty well. But in other spaces as well, I think in healthcare, we did a lot of work with, for instance, Blue Cross, and then the other Blue Crosses would talk, or we did work with DoD with, Seminole Labs, Los Alamos, and then started working on the other national labs. So definitely a lot of referral. I have a kind of a belief now that I look back, at least on what we've been doing, that there's at least a stream of work that happens in our field that's very similar to, I would say, like the movie business. So where people know other people, they have a very specific project. And just like if you're making a movie or maybe making a song, you're like, who's the best lighting person? Who's the best gaffer, et cetera? Who's the best person for post-editing? And so people would call these people, and what I've seen is we would come into projects with other people over and over, just through that referral network. And oftentimes it was a good impedance match. So we were the right choice, as opposed to, doing a lot of marketing and putting out RFPs and seeing if we won. In fact, looking back now after 25 years, I was thinking we've only actually filled out, done 2 RFPs. The client didn't know us, we got a request, we did all this work, filled it out, and then later I found out they'd already made a choice, and we were just kind of a formality. So after, that was a good lesson. Maybe we could have had a lot more work if we'd done it, but generally what I found is that if we know clients, or if they don't know who we are, we'll say, have a talk with these 3 or 4 people, and then after that, it's basically when do we schedule you in and make things happen. So it's been pretty easy that way.
Did you find that your referrals were based on a level of trust or a level of familiarity with your work, or both?
I think both. We, obviously we're in a space where there was things that, we were working on systems. So, there's a high degree of complexity. So basically it would say, this is who you want to call. And so we would come in from that space. Generally, we also had someone who was maybe at another company where we did work. They would go to a company and then they would hear, oh, we have a need for this. And they'd say, I got the person to call. And so that person was, putting their name, I guess, on the line for us to come in, which, for us is important. I mean, that means when we're going in, I know that that person's putting their reputation on the line for us to be there, and we need to deliver. And so I take that as an accountability and to make sure that we, in fact, do that. And, luckily over the years, it's worked out pretty well.
So how have you marketed yourself? How did you know that you could market your consulting services in the UX space as a way that was diametrically different from other firms or other individuals or companies offering the same type of service?
So 2 things there. First, I never really looked at what anyone else did. Okay. I just am very focused on what we do. And luckily, just through referrals again, I've been able to speak. There's at a lot of conferences. The conferences aren't as kind of big as they used to be. So that's changed a little bit over time. And now they're more niche conferences. But X and you name it. So there was a lot of large software development conferences that over the years, if you obviously got good ratings and you're easy to work with and you had good talks, and people liked you, they'd have you back. And so that was another area where at least people would have seen me talk, realized after a little bit of time that we had some pretty unique experience. And then, then through referrals, they would probably have us come in and do some work for them. Yeah.
Okay.
So not a lot of, writing. I think there's been a little bit. I say that I wasn't intentionally writing, but for instance, going back, if I just look back on, on what we were doing for work, we started off, doing obviously, like I say, these consulting gigs. So they'd be 1 week gigs, and it was value-based pricing. So even back 20 years ago, it would be for a week could be $25,000 as an example. So there's kind of a burden on us to deliver. Over time, going fast forward maybe 10 years into this in the early 2000s, we discovered prototyping tools like Azure. So, and I worked with Victor Sue, who's the owner, creator of Azure, and we developed that further. And then we worked on some very big projects and helped in writing a book on Azure prototyping. I'm not sure if you have used Azure or not. Obviously, then over time now we've switched over to things like Sketch and now looking at Figma. But that was there were some things like that where we would either write articles or help with writing books to get the word out. But really, it's just been busy working. There's projects, and then if there was a little bit of free time or we had some openings, we'd say we've got some availability, and the phone seems to ring, or get email, and we'd figure out if it would work, and then just make it happen.
I was an early adopter of Azure, actually. I worked with it all the way until I think about version 4 or 5. One of the things I was desperately trying to get the company to do is get more serious about its exporting to requirements, which I saw as like a really key differentiator for them in terms of other people that were entering the prototyping market, but they never went down that road. Literally being able to take the artifacts that were done in those prototypes and making it so that you could customize the fonts, you could have all the details out there so that you hand it off to a developer and they would have at least the beginnings of what they know what to do. So that was, I have pretty extensive experience.
If you look at Azure, that was a little further. So you dumped it kind of before they figured that out. So we were on a really big project, 2010, I think. And so, we had that issue. So there was a lot of compliance issues. So you'd put all this stuff into Azure at the time and the requirements piece where you could actually spit out like Word document, an XML. And the thing I loved was the prototype and the Word document were generated from the same XML source. So you never have finger pointing where someone documentation never matched prototype, the working prototype. So, but the output for the specifications was very weak. So we actually worked extensively with them on that on version 6 and 7 to get the requirements output much better. And so if you ever pick up, it's an older book now, but Azure 6, it talks all about that. And we actually had influence on making that happen over time with that product. They were trying to get it to work on the Mac and everything else. So, but we were creaming the same thing. So I've picked up where you left off, and we actually got them to deliver a pretty good output, in fact, out of Azure.
If only our paths had crossed earlier, I would have basically told you, like, okay, here's exactly what they need to do. But it sounds like you figured it all the same and worked pretty close with them and getting it right. You had mentioned
Yeah.
value-based pricing before, and that perked me up because I'm actually in deploying that as well, or at least in that space. When you were trying to gauge what you felt your tiered pricing was, meaning like what you could basically had to charge to cover your costs versus what you felt was at the appropriate value of what you were charging based on some sort of metric, whether it's yearly revenue or something else that the company saw as a marker for what they were investing in with your company. How did you figure that out? Did you have your
Mhm.
own kind of approach to it every time, depending on the client, or was it kind of the same system for every engagement that you had?
It's pretty much the same for every engagement. So we did things like rapid review, which was kind of a package, heuristic evaluation. So we had a package price on that, figured out kind of where that fit in. Consulting would be packaged, you get a time, basically a week of my time for a certain amount. For someone that worked for me, there was a different price. And as I got really busy, and this is something I guess we'll be thinking about the next, year as we scale this and we have more people doing, design sprints, is that, the principal, oftentimes you get overwhelmed. Everyone wants you. They don't want the person that works for you. So you just kind of keep hiking up your price, so that, you can get me, but, for half the price, you can get this person who was trained by me. So, I've used that model and it's actually worked out pretty well as well. So when I started the business, just to go back to your original question, I was already kind of working at a certain rate. So when the consulting company that I'd been working for got bought out, they didn't really want part of the consulting. They just wanted the product. And actually, when they bought the product, they killed it because they had a very high-end product. And we were actually out basically killing their sales because they spend a year selling this big enterprise requirements kind of modeling tool. And then we'd say, well, why don't you just use this really simple tool that we built, and the companies would actually buy it. So we were killing their sales, bought the product and killed it. And they didn't really want the consulting. So they handed us, I had a nice jump start. So they handed me all the consulting groups, clients and all that. So I had already had a rate. So we were that was a nice forward. Obviously that was over 20 years ago, but just continued forward from there. And generally what I found is that, again, if people were looking, we were pretty much always pretty much at the top end of the price, but price was never an issue. So if a customer didn't know what we did, that was the challenge. Or if they were questioning the price, then they didn't really understand what the value was that we provided. So one of the things that I would say is understand the value that you are bringing as far as driving change to client, and make sure that you're not, telling people, but making sure that they're aware of how you are moving. And on the converse side, if you're there and you're not really moving the needle as a consultant or even internally in your organization, figure out why and make sure that you're actually working on the right things. And that's critical. I mean, as you know, you're a consultant. And many times what people bring you in for, or what they think is important, as you really get into it, and obviously design sprints kind of tease that out, the bigger issue may not be, what you originally came there for. So it's your job to figure that out and then prioritize, work with the team, get them aligned, and then execute on the things that will really move the needle.
Yeah, the business outcomes that they're eventually after. And I agree with you. It's having those conversations with different people to not only get a different perspectives on the what they're after, but ultimately what maybe some core issues that for one reason or another they're not either paying attention to or they may not even be aware of.
And I think that, here's the thing. In UX, we right now we have an incredible opportunity. This is our time, because you have to realize executives are looking at what can I do to move the needle next year? What can I do to really make a difference? And they're realizing and it wasn't us, it was Apple, it was all these companies who have actually have really focused on what does design mean, what does good product, creating great products really mean. And when they've executed on it, you can see it in the numbers. And so when they can understand that they can have that happen within their organization, or they can bring people in who can help them say, hey, there's 5 roads we can go down, but we're going to be able to run a design sprint and actually really solidify and focus on one that we actually know is going to actually move the needle. Those are high value discussions and things that you can actually bring to the table as a consultant or intern in your organization. This is a wonderful time to be in the field we're at. because the executives are looking for to us to actually move the needle, and we can do it. Anyone that listening to this, you could actually do that this year in a bigger company.
Do you find in the enterprise space in particular, has the conversation changed a little bit less than about UX and more about product and growth in relation to how design is being applied? Last year, I kind of posited that based on what I was seeing, at least on the middle tier, that UX was starting to mature to a state where people knew about it and just expected it to be part of their product. And it was starting to center more on the holistic view of how a product actually fit into the market, how it was meant to perform, what were the projections around growth, and that the conversation around the actual design experience was starting to evolve. And I'd like to get your take on that, because I'm wondering, since you've been in the enterprise UX space for so long, if you're starting to see that same sort of change that at least I was picking up on in the middle of this year.
First off, we've never been the company that you come in to say, well, you should move the button over here. This is probably not the right font. Every project I've looked at, and that we've been involved with, I look at the holistic view. So, if you're brought in, to lead design sprints, to be a true digital leader, you need to be looking holistically at all the systems and what's actually happening, whether it's the users, the product, et cetera. And then what I do is I look for low points in that overall journey, that overall experience. So that would translate, for instance, design sprint to the map. Now, the thing that we maybe have an advantage is we do have, the whole usability component of our business. So we can do heuristic evaluations. We have a usability lab. We can get all the way down to eye tracking if you needed to. But now you're down in the weeds. So stepping up, if you get the 30,000 foot view, you can say, well, wait a minute, here are 4 areas of huge amount of friction in this overall experience. This is where we're going to focus these low points and really move the needle, and then align the actual work around those. And so that's obviously a huge value compared to, I really improved the product detail page of this and that. That is a given. They're expecting we're going to have a good UX. But even that, so a lot of the work we're doing starts off with strategy and then working with the development teams on actually implementing that strategy.
So how have you been seeing design sprints and the activities that are involved with that? How has the market been for that from your perspective?
When I first saw, and read the book in design sprints, I'm like, well, we've been doing this for like years. What I loved about design sprints was that it kind of made it formalized. There's some checklists, there's an order, there's a logic, and they've definitely brought in things like, how they do dot voting, how ask the certain types of questions at certain times. So they've kind of made a better system about what we were doing. Because again, as we did consulting, a lot of times, we'd be brought in for a week, and now we would get brought in for a week, not really knowing what we were going to get out at the end of the week. So we didn't call it a design sprint. They said, hey, call these guys. They can help you get going in the right direction, and then let's see where we take it from there. So, I would get in on Monday, kind of oftentimes with not a lot of knowledge about where we were going. And on Fridays, that's birthday day, so we get to open the presents. And I'm laser focused here. As far as how we get to Friday, we would have a certain process that we would do. Who are the actors and who are the users and the tasks, and what are the journeys, et cetera. I'd make sure that we got out of got whatever friction points there was out of the way to actually get to that goal. Now, so I feel like there's always been a need. This isn't something that people said, hey, this is an idea, we need to do it. They've always wanted it. Now that it's formalized and being more formalized and people are understanding, I think that there is still that need. Now, the thing you want to look at is, if you look, especially in the enterprise space, just look at a bell curve of most projects. If you call 20 companies and said, okay, I want to do design sprints. If you just look at a bell curve of their overall project portfolio, most people are, at the top of the bell curve is not doing sprints. That's like the very, very far left, right? So most projects are already in process. Somewhere in process, we've already got requirements. We're going from development sprint to development sprint. We're trying to get our next release out. So they're heads down. So I wouldn't say that, that there's this huge demand to say, oh yeah, we want to do design sprints. On the other hand, when you work with product managers, they are kind of wondering, well, what would be the next best feature? What do I need to be thinking about in 6 months? So what we're doing is where we help with companies with that, the top of the bell, like get these projects out. How do we help, get the UX right, whether it's testing or design? But we run a second track, so I call it PEX, where we'll say, well, tell you what, you don't want to take the wheels off what you have going. So keep all your projects going. We'll help out with the UX where we can in different capacities. Let's run a second track where we're just doing some innovation. So if they're open to that, they're thinking, okay, that's not going to divert everyone from all the work that we already have going, that we're already laid on or done, but at least we can run these little innovation sprints and make sure that if we need to make some kind of adjustments 4 months down the road, 5 months down the road, we can actually make that happen. And to me, that's much more easy. It's much more digestible for organizations to understand. I don't know if you've ever, Robert, if you've ever worked for instance, with a PMO organization, project management office, right? Mm-hmm. So, they'll go through in large companies and say, well, here's what we're doing next year. And there's all this jostling, right? And so what are we going to get done? And, prioritize it, and what's in, what's out, and how do we get the resources? So then if you just come in and say, well, let's just throw all that off the table, let's do some sprints, you're going to piss off a lot of people. So instead say, okay, get that going, great, keep what you're doing, but outside of that, let's just think about if we can get some innovation things going. And if one of these is so compelling, then we might have to go back through the PMO and rejig some of this to actually make that happen. And so to me, that's how we've done it, and it's actually been relatively successful.
And also, you could do from the B2B angle, if you found it, let's say your pipeline is filled for like the coming year because you did your big room planning, like maybe in the summer or fall of the previous year, and everything, all the budgets are locked. You really don't have any kind of bandwidth beyond what a company may actually fund. Then that's the route you would probably have to go, is that the company itself finds the funds to basically take what you've gotten up from an innovation sprint per se, and kind of make that a reality, or at least follow it to a certain stage where they feel like they could invest more into what they're doing. But sometimes it's just being able to provide that space to say everything stays the way it is from the perspective of planning and what you have strategically, but let's have this track that kind of corresponds to a few things that you have in the main track, and kind of see where this kind of fleshes out. And it really is this X amount of time commitment and resource commitment to make that happen.
Like an example, an actual conversation I had last year. So I met with the president of a company and just had met, and I said, okay, so how's it going? Do you think you're going to make your numbers this year? Because their company was very numbers driven. He says, well, I think we're going to be shy about $10 million. I'm looking for 10 million. And it's a significant number. So I said, so you've got everything in play. What change to make that happen? He says, I'm not sure. I said, what are the 5 things that could happen that could make, that could actually make an impact? And so we kind of listed those on a whiteboard. We had a kind of working, and one of them was a big pain point. And he says, I bet we could get 15 million revenue if we could ever solve this. But this particular problem is, it's one that no one wants to ever touch. Right now, this process takes like literally 6 months. It's, you even bring it up and the back of their neck bristles. So it's, and he even got kind of negative, but he goes, if we could ever solve it, that would be great. So I said, okay, that's interesting. And I thought about it, and I said, okay, tell you what, I'm going to propose something. We're going to do a design sprint and explain what it is. We're going to take a week and basically get your folks in there, and I need your commitment. And I looked him straight in the eye. I said, I need your commitment and help make those decisions. And then at the Friday, if we can actually have something that we think is viable, that actually is going to get that 10 million, I need you to do what you need to do. He was president of a bigger company, so he had to go to other presidents and other people. I said, I need you to commit to me that you're going to actually get this to happen, because I don't want to waste my time and I don't want to waste your time. So I don't want to do this and say someday we'll do it. So I know it's not on the plan. I know that it's going to be friction to get the PMO and all these other groups to buy and get the engineering staff. But if we have something that's really good on Friday, do you think we'll make that number? I need your commitment to you're actually going to drive it and make it happen. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So anyhow, we scheduled it. It worked out really well. We actually went from 6 months to the same process. We got it done and actually got it implemented. And there was a huge amount of stuff that, I won't get into the whole details, but there was a huge amount of stuff as you get into sprints that had nothing to do with the UX. In fact, most of it didn't have to do with the UX. It had to do with the way they were procuring product, the way they were doing contracts, everything. And so one thing I will say for enterprise UX that they don't really talk about, in the master class and other things I've seen is, I realized, and as you're stating, you have to realize what's going to make this sprint actionable. And this company was very numbers driven. So this particular sprint, what I did is I actually had a person who was from the finance side, and I had them work working on the sprint to come up with a financial model, so that at the end of Friday, not only do we have a working prototype that we usability tested, but they had a financial model that proved it out. I didn't want to have this, because what I was concerned was, we'll have this great thing and they'd say, yeah, but how much money are we really going to make? And to me, remember, the whole agreement was, we think we're going to make 10 million out of this. And so they modeled it, and we had a working model that proved, with a pretty good hypothesis that, if we actually built this, that we were going to make the 10 million. So it also cost justified it, and it kind of greased the wheels to make it happen. So anyhow, just a tip. But as you're in there as a facilitator, running the design sprints, constantly think to yourself, we're working really our tails off. And how many of these, is this project, what's going to take to actually make it go into fruition and actually get done, so that they can execute, and make sure that you have the tools and the people and everything in place, so that when you finish up, it actually gets built.
Did this person that was working on the financial aspect of this particular endeavor, did they work on their own time, and they just had to basically, they were given some sort of deliverable to hit by the end of, say, Wednesday or Thursday? Or did they work alongside with the team and understanding what they were building and driving towards that would influence the numbers and what they were estimating?
Yeah, great question, Robert. So no, they were there from the beginning. It was interesting too, because it was a lady, and she was very sharp with her numbers, but it was kind of awkward. Like, for instance, I remember when we did the Crazy 8 sketches, and then we went into the final sketches, and we did dot voting. I remember, like, in her sketches, and she was pretty powerful in the organization as far as, where she stood, et cetera. But like, I remember one of her, none of her sketches got any dots. It was kind of this awkward moment, because I feel like no one voted for my stuff. But, but she wasn't there, but I really wanted her there to understand why we were doing it, to hear the empathy, hear the user interviews, see the passion everyone else was putting into it, and know that her stuff was absolutely, if she had to come up with these models, it was absolutely critical to the team to make that happen, right? Not 3 months from now, we'll do some modeling and do some finance stuff. So absolutely, she was part of it. And I worked through the issue of, not getting a lot of votes. And part of it was hard to, and Jake's talked about this, it was kind of hard to read some of the writing and stuff. So it has nothing to do with necessarily the design. But that's the reality. And so, when you're working on your projects, whether it's with a startup or large organizations, think about, when we're done, what's it going to take to actually, get this thing out there? We don't want to just spend the next year doing design sprints, of which, 1 out of 20 actually got built. We want to see, 19, 20 out of 20.
Yeah, you have to look at the holistic view of the entire thing. One of the things that I've seen is, and I see it as an Achilles heel of the process, is that you really feel really great about all the work that was done during the week. And there's this notion that you can do an iteration sprint, you can refine it and everything else. But then there's the notion that things are just going to take care of themselves after it's all said and done, whether it's putting into an agile framework where you start off with sprint 0, or you start putting it through the feasibility, desirability, and viability model where you try to figure out there's an actual business case to move it forward. I think the greater conversation needs to happen, like you gave the example of what this entire thing looks like from soup to nuts on a strategy perspective, so that when you get out of that week, that's really only part 1 of 5. So it's maybe like the middle tier. And then really what you're talking about is like you had people within the sprint thinking about the financial aspects of things, probably the strategic aspects of things. What are you talking about in terms of a dev resource commitment, as well as like an overall implementation of a strategy, and where other departments get involved? It really does need that holistic view for it to basically make sense. Otherwise, it's an exercise in understanding how to be more efficient with your time and with your resources and getting project work done. But you absolutely need to have the bigger picture in mind. And sometimes it takes more than one person besides the decider to kind of hold that.
What I looked at was, okay, where's the friction? What, we can do this, but what's going to, even if I get this, got the president to say, hey, but I need to give him some legs to, and some people to support him, right? So the other area, I knew at this particular company, there was a huge amount of friction from engineering. They're already overwhelmed. They have too many projects. Everything was taking too long, blah, 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 right? And then, if it's a sprint, how it is, these big companies trying to get an estimate what this would actually take to implement, and then get it, teed up so it can actually be in a development sprint and everything. Now all of a sudden you've thrown 2-3 months of delay, right? So what I did, the other thing I actually got and did some alignment and got a very, very senior engineering architect at Design Sprint. And I told him maybe I want to say maybe the end of the first day, because first he's, why am I even here? I don't sketch, blah, 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 right? I said, no. I said, by Friday, I need an entire, very pretty detailed engineering estimate of what this is going to cost, whatever we come up with to implement. And then as we went through the sprint, he got, obviously more engaged. He understood that he was part of this. He was building it. And I remember talking to him on Thursday night, and I said, you know what, this is super important to have a solid engineering estimate of what this is really going to take to build. It's pretty complex. There's no one who knows more about what needs to be done than you. And it just was quiet. And he looked at me and I said, so you're the guy, and I need it tomorrow. And we need it tomorrow, right? And he delivered. And he had a really good incredibly detailed estimate. And again, that could have been another 2 or 3 months. So just kind of look with your projects and figure out, and I'm not saying you're always going to get the head architect, et cetera, in these design sprints, but if you can look at where there's going to be friction points, especially in large companies, to move forward and try to alleviate that, and then bring that energy into the sprint. So he wanted to get it built by Friday. He wanted to see this happen. And then he actually came up with 2 options. Here's option A and option B. And then, we went through and did that. But that's a far cry from here's a sprint and let's throw it over to wall engineering and see if when they have time, they're going to give us an estimate.
On the voice projects I've been a part of, and they were developer centric, I had that same resistance, at least on the first day, where they just didn't understand what their role was. But as it became clear, what was very interesting from when I facilitated those was the amount of work they did outside of the sprint, with the assumption that they were preparing either the test environment or like the process of basically getting everything ready for this thing to live in, whether it was the databases or the code base or anything like that. And unless it was explicitly stated, they would volunteer their time outside of what they were normally doing at work to get it done. So it clued me into the idea that, like you're saying, give someone something to shoot for by the end of the week that would prepare everyone for an extended conversation of where it goes. And especially with that voice tech we were working on, it proved to be a real conversation mover. It basically moved the needle forward with people that were looking at investing more time and energy towards a particular initiative, especially if somebody who was senior to a certain extent that was part of the sprint could vouch for it and say, look, I experienced this. This is where I think it could go. Here are the options we have. So yeah, I definitely align with that entire approach of getting advocates for what they experience in that particular week. For you in particular, going up into 2019, what are you looking forward to? Like what are some things that are on your plate in the first couple of quarters? What are you looking to do more with design sprints? Are you experimenting with the model? I mean, what do you have planned?
Oh, great question. So a couple things. First off, how kind of run those 2 tracks, those parallel tracks? How do we allow for design sprints to deal with the ideation and then that interface with both product management, so they understand, okay, here's your roadmap? Because you realize that most product managers in large companies, at least, they've got a roadmap usually, at least a year, 18 months out. So, how do we actually influence that and help them to dial that in? And also, I want to look at how we hand off the output of sprints for execution within the enterprise, again, with both developers. So I think that right now, what I'm seeing even in some of the masterclass material and other people, we have these really detailed, pixel perfect, outcomes on Friday. I actually disagree with that. I think that, the sprint should validate the concept, but I think that in fact, I saw that, I think Matus, I don't know his last name, but he just put together that framework in Figma. He just posted on the Facebook group, where it's just kind of black and white. We tended to do that a lot because what I've seen is people get a false sense of completion. They think it's all done because it's all beautiful and there's great colors and it looks nice, and then you tend to miss a lot of stuff. I've been doing this a long time, and we're far from perfect. And so I like to stay at a lower level of fidelity and work through exactly how things should be working, make sure that we've aligned on, the big issues we're actually trying to solve. And then subsequent sprints, you can add the detail. But I found that if you add the detail too soon, you can overdevelop the prototype and you'll miss key things later. And that's super expensive once during the engineering phase. And we did this with Azure too. There's nothing to do with Figma or Sketch or any of these. If you get really good at any of these tools, it's easy. It's an easy trap to fall into, to just, make it a little better, make it a little bit more interactive, add a few more colors. And next thing you know, you've made it look beautiful, but you missed some. And so, what's the level of fidelity that we need to add to this prototype to take it to the next step? Then what's the level we need to be able to hand it off to development so that there's not a big gap there? And like I said, I was working on this 10 years ago with Azure. We worked on it with Sketch. We used Zeppelin to do handoff of assets and other tools there. And then, now I'm looking at Figma and seeing, is there some ways we can actually improve the game even with that tool? And the third thing is remote prototyping and facilitation. So I know you're obviously, and I really wish I could have been part of that remote sprint. I was over in, working over in Europe and doing design sprints over in Denmark, and then I was down in Italy, and all different languages. And so it was too much of a stretch to try to do that the same week you were doing your remote design sprint. But congratulations by doing that, and thank you for doing it. But that's a huge thing. Obviously, I moved out of the Silicon Valley about 7 years ago. I think that the world's going to be a lot more doing a lot more remote work. And we actually had gone on vacation up here where I am now, and on this, and I said I want to live on this lake, and so we moved, and it's been great. But obviously, that means we still have to do work, and the more we can do it remotely and not have to fly, is wonderful. I think that so remote facilitation and how to do it well. It's been tough for me. I mean, literally, I have you can't see me, but I've got my 2 million mile card just on United. I've got another one from Southwest. I've flown a lot over the years, but kind of where we're if we can do some of the stuff remotely and create that same in-person experience, that would be great. I'm also looking at how we can bring in remote prototyping, and our staff, for instance, we have some great prototypers, but this is a tough business. If you're trying to do for instance 2-week sprints, that means fly in person. A lot of our work's on the East Coast, so flying a person out to the East Coast, and then they'll look at me. I'm in Wednesday, Thursday, and they're tired and they're thinking, I don't like traveling, and I'm working, and they're working on this prototype, and they're thinking I could be doing this from my house. Why am I here in New York City or wherever? So can we bring in remote prototypers and have them even be more effective than on site? And I think that will make for better retention of prototyping skills and people, and also happier prototypers. So again, we don't want to do something that's going to jeopardize the overall goal.
And one of the things that speaks to your history is that you're probably very, very good at face-to-face engagement and conversation and recognizing and understanding the tone in a room. So maybe there's something for your particular path, that's something where you don't necessarily completely go on the remote route, but you have that initial engagement where they get to know you on a human level, face to face, and then the rest of the engagement can be from a perspective where someone's in a different side of the world, but they still know what you're about and who you are. So two of the things that may correlate with what you were talking about is that there's going to be another remote sprint in April, another event like this, but this is going to be the official one. It looks like it's going to take on 2 different tracks. One is going to be for charity. So a lot of local and national charities would be the subject for the challenge, where you, like say for the Austin one that Lee Duncan is got himself involved with, and Bill Lexi and all those guys, they're basically creating an app for disaster recovery. I think it's disaster recovery. I forget the official name, but essentially going down that route with working with local charities. And the other is kind of like a hackathon style contest, where people who are very competitive or have a competitive streak can use the design sprint process to build the best possible like prototype or example that would meet a challenge, and that there would be some sort of either prize or notoriety or something that corresponds to that. That's at least from the feedback that I had gotten from the last time. And then the other thing is that there's the beginnings of a referral network, which is going to be based on direct experience with practitioners as well as trust networks, or at least the concept of trust networks. So I'm just in the middle of finishing up an article that I'm sending out this weekend, so that the people that had worked on the original Design Sprint Challenge can take a look at that and see if it strikes true to them, and if I documented their effort appropriately. So between those 2 things, it align, especially through the referral network. I'd be keen to get your perspective on it, since that's something that you're kind of playing in that space next year, where can you basically do kind of the remote work and still bring a quality to the not only the work, but also the experience and the relationship that you have with clients.
Yeah, and I think going back to what I was saying with it, that our business was kind of based on that, and based on similar. If you look at again the music business, the movie business, those are referral networks, right? So we're going to do a movie, and it's who and people make these connections, and so if we can help facilitate that, I think for our business that would be great. It would allow us to scale, and I think people would find the swimming lanes that they're best in, so that we could put together not just who's available or who will get on a plane, but who's the best person for this particular gig.
Yeah, and
Yes.
my hope is that it allows businesses like yours and Bill's and other folks that hold the business relationship or are very good at kind of generating interest in on the consulting side with the kinds of things that design thinking and design sprints can do, or basically that process is being able to give you a network of people that are trusted by others, that kind of fit the problem, or at least the opportunity that you're looking to basically fill with professionals, and have that at hand, so that it allows you to expand a bit beyond bringing on full-time work, or taking on, or just basically having a not narrow, but just like a certain limit in terms of how much you can take on. It basically giving you options in terms of who you can actually reach out to for assistance with kind of doing those types of sprints, remote or otherwise.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. And, like I said, we've got, along both our clients expect certain things of us, and then I expect certain things of people on our teams. So they're very intense weeks, so, I don't know how you're going to be, setting it up, but, are the people going to be able to, when they're on the sprint? I know, like when I go on the road doing this for a long time, I'm laser focused on the client and what we're going to get done that week. And so we want to have obviously people on our team that they know when they sign up and work with us, when they're our employees and stuff, but when you're there, you're there. I can't, I think probably been 10 years since I actually took a phone call. I literally don't take phone calls, and it's just a different world. So, but that's expected. So as we, go forward with this, and it's interesting, will we be able to have that level of focus, that level of execution when we're doing it remotely? And the goal will be, in fact, that yes, in fact, we will. And what you said earlier is definitely how we work. Definitely, we'll go out there, we'll start working with clients, and if I'm out there, and then they'll do follow-up sessions, and sometimes, especially if they're East Coast or in Europe or Asia or something, we'll just do calls. And so we'll do follow-ups via Zoom, et cetera. They know how we work, et cetera. So that's kind of a model that we're used to, and I want to see that grow going into 2019 as well.
I think it will. I think it's just a natural progression of not only the tech, but also the notion that remote working can be done effectively, given that there's certain expectations are hit on both sides and people know what they're getting into. So I'm right there with you.
We just set the tone. So, it's funny. One is, when you said value-based pricing, there's a couple things that work. One is that, when you have, when the company's spending a lot of money, plus, we should really take design sprints very seriously, and that, it's not that, hey, we get this cool thing and it's done on Friday, and that was really a lot of fun. Just think from the company's perspective. They may be spending, if they move forward with this sprint, you say, oh, let's go ahead and build it. They may be spending 10, 20, 50 million. So one of our clients we worked with, it was I think a $300 product. So they're going to spend a lot of money. Plus, they're not spending it on something else. So there's some ability on our side that as we're doing this, and as we're working people through maybe the first week and second week, and then as these projects go to fruition, that we need to be doing our job and really making sure that we're on the right things and that we're really moving the needle, because at the end of the day, they're going to build this, and even let's say you get it done, right? I mean, everyone's probably seen a project where, it was thought about, talked about, built, and you're like, well, I don't know, it didn't really change sales, at all, or it didn't really drive the engagement we thought. Well, who's accountable for that? So these are the key thing is that there's 5 ways you can go, which is the way we should go. And then how certain are we that this is actually going to work? It doesn't mean we're going to hit the ball every single time, but we should be moving the needle, and we should be really improving our odds by doing this. And that's how we're actually going to, I think, as a group and as professionals, we're going to be looked at and judged over time.
Yeah, and I really think that for some designers that are oriented towards business outcomes, because there are some out there, like I used to work with someone at Sabre that was very much about market impact and understanding business numbers and revenue and market share and all those things, analytics. For people that are naturally inclined to do that, really encourage designers and practitioners to start delving into this space, because eventually it's going to be something that they're going to have to address, whether they become a consultant full-time or even working with consultants and being able to speak that language on that level. I kind of push back on the notion that people can get romantic just about the process and assume that it's just going to be the silver bullet that hits everything. You really got to understand like the overall spectrum of how this process kind of feeds into that business conversation that you've been making a living on in terms of kind of showcasing the value of what you bring and also the kinds of processes that you put it forth to kind of get your clients to where they need to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tool in our toolbox, and that's what it is, right? And so use the tool when it makes sense. When it doesn't, then don't. There's plenty of other ways, but ultimately we're supposed to be driving change. And as I said, this is an awesome time to be in this field because we can actually move the needle, but we have to make sure we're working on the right things. It doesn't mean checking off boxes in a checklist, right? And getting through 4 days. It means really being open. Like when I got in, just one last thing I'll say, when I got into going back to that one I was talking about a year ago where we did with that president of the company, I got into it and it opened up this rat's nest. They're contracting, they're signing the wrong contracts. That was nothing to do with what I thought we were getting into. But, it was like, this is like the biggest problem. So I go, okay. So I took another couple more people and I said, okay, your job is to redo the entire way you're contracting all your business with all these, and this was in the travel space, so with all the hotels and on and on and on. And it made a huge difference, but they were like, oh, really right now? I'm like, yep, this is what we're doing. Because you know what, if we can make the beautiful UI, but if you don't deal with this, then we're wasting our time. We're all wasting our time. So really be focused on outcomes. And I learned that, early on in my consulting career, I just was really blessed to work with been blessed to work with great companies. And as you know, as a consultant, you get to learn from each of your clients. And literally every time we were working on a project, Progressive, some executive, someone would come to the room, you'd have some idea and they'd say, and how does that help us sell more insurance? And if you didn't have that, if you couldn't really articulate that pretty quickly, like we're wasting our time. So, and obviously they've driven a lot of innovation at that particular company, but at the end of the day, they're answering themselves, how does that help us?
If people want to find out more about what you do and, your company and kind of what you're offering, where should they go online?
Okay, so obviously our website is classicsys.com. As I said, we don't do a whole lot of marketing, but there's case studies and lots of articles that are written over the years. I'm also on the Enterprise UX group on LinkedIn. You can find things there. And I've actually just started writing a few articles. I wrote an article on Medium about design sprints. Are they the next silver bullet? So you'll have to read that to find out what my answer is.
Excellent. Well, James, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Robert. It's a pleasure to talk with you as well. Take care.
Thanks again for listening to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. If you have a question or comment about what you heard on today's show, email me direct at robert@dallasdesignsprints.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. Just do a Google search for Robert Scrobe or ask a friend and see if they know. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.